Welcome back, everyone. We've had a lot of requests to take a closer look at Abraham Lincoln, and I have to say I'm pretty excited about this one.
He's a fascinating figure.
Really fascinating. There's so much more to him than just the serious face on the $5 bill.
And that's what we're going to dive into today. We've got a biography here that we'll be pulling from, along with some online resources that focus on, get this, Lincoln's humor.
His humor. See, that's what I'm talking about. That's the stuff you don't usually hear about. The guy who led the nation through the Civil War, cracking jokes.
It might seem surprising, but Lincoln was actually known for his wit and his storytelling ability.
I guess it makes sense. When you think about it, humor can be a really powerful tool, especially when things are tough. It can break the tension, make people feel more at ease.
Absolutely. It can disarm people, make them more receptive to your message, create a sense of connection. Even his childhood is full of these humorous anecdotes. The biography talks about how his own mother warned him not to stand too still for too long.
Why? What was she worried about?
She told him people might mistake him for a tree. And Lincoln's response was classic. He said goats kept giving him suspicious looks.
Oh, I love it. He's totally poking fun at his own height and lanky appearance.
And it's important to remember the context here. Lincoln grew up in poverty, had very little formal education. Self-deprecating humor like that could have been a way to disarm potential critics, make himself seem more relatable.
Hey, I know I'm not perfect, but let's focus on what matters.
And this tactic, this use of disarming humor, continued into his professional life. The biography highlights a story about his time as a lawyer. A judge commented on his simple attire, not exactly courtroom chic. "You're not far off." And Lincoln, quick as a whip, responds with, "Your Honor, you should judge me by my arguments, not my trousers."
What a comeback. He's deflecting the criticism with humor, but also subtly asserting his confidence.
And it wasn't just for laughs. Humor in the courtroom could make complex legal arguments more accessible, more memorable for juries.
It's a way of connecting with them on a human level.
And there's that connection aspect again. It seems to be a recurring theme with Lincoln.
So are there other examples of him using humor in his legal career?
Absolutely. There's this great anecdote about how Lincoln used to store important documents in his hat. During one trial, he's rummaging through his hat and says something like, "My hat is my archive. More efficient than most libraries I know."
I love that he's turning a practical necessity into a joke. And it plays into that image of him as resourceful, down to earth.
Not some stuffy, out-of-touch lawyer.
And that image would prove to be pretty essential as he transitioned into politics.
Absolutely. That's where we really see his humor shine.
Okay, so let's talk about that. How did he use humor on the campaign trail? Did it play a role in his run for president?
Oh, without a doubt. The biography mentions several instances of his clever quips and anecdotes.
Like what? Give me an example.
There's this one where he was asked about his chances of winning the election, and his response. He compared himself to a sheep that had just jumped over a fence.
He did not. Okay, I have to hear this.
He said, "There are those who are going to chase me, and there are those who are going to stand by and watch me to see whether I light on my head or my heels."
That's amazing. It's funny. It's self-deprecating, but it also acknowledges the uncertainty of the race.
It creates this sense of suspense. You almost want to lean in and see what happens next. Will he land on his head or his heels?
And it presents him as approachable, someone who doesn't take himself too seriously.
Which, as we've seen, was a recurring theme with Lincoln.
And it obviously resonated with people. So how did his humor evolve when he became president? Facing the pressures of the Civil War, you'd think humor might be the first thing to go.
And this ability to connect through humor extended even to how he dealt with his political rivals. There's this fascinating anecdote where he compares dealing with opponents to a cat dealing with a rat.
Okay, that's an image I wasn't expecting. Tell me more about this cat and rat analogy.
Lincoln tells this story about how if a rat runs past you, you don't chase after it. You let the cat take care of it, even if it means a bit of a mess in the process.
It's funny, but there's also a deeper message there, isn't there? It suggests a certain strategic patience, a willingness to let things play out.
Yes, it speaks to his ability to detach from the immediate fray, to see the bigger picture. And perhaps it also suggests a certain acceptance of the messy realities of politics and life in general.
It's fascinating how these seemingly simple stories reveal so much about his approach to leadership. And speaking of leadership, this brings us to the broader question of Lincoln's enduring legacy. Why, even today, does he remain such a revered figure in American history?
It's a question historians and scholars continue to grapple with. But I think it's safe to say that Lincoln's humor is part of what makes him so relatable, even all these years later. It humanizes him, reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable challenges, he never lost his wit or his ability to connect with people on a fundamental level.
And his humor seems to be the thread that weaves all those qualities together. It's not just a separate aspect of his personality, it's integral to who he was as a leader and as a human being.
You've hit the nail on the head there. It's woven into the very fabric of his leadership style. And what's remarkable is that his humor wasn't just effective in his time, it continues to resonate with us today. Many of his stories and quips offer insights that are just as relevant now as they were back then.
That's a great point. So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear what you think are some of the most enduring lessons we can learn from Lincoln's approach to humor. And how can we apply those lessons in our own lives, especially in today's world?
It's interesting because even amidst the immense stress and gravity of the Civil War, Lincoln's humor never really disappeared. If anything, it seemed to become even more essential.
Really? So it wasn't just a campaign tactic, it was something deeper.
It really was. There are numerous accounts of Lincoln using humor to cope with stress, to boost morale, even to disarm his opponents.
Okay, so walk me through this. What kind of things was he doing?
Take, for instance, the story of Lincoln visiting a group of soldiers. One soldier had a particularly long face, and Lincoln asked him why he looked so down. The soldier replied, "Mr. President, it's this terrible war. It's wearing on all of us."
I can only imagine the toll it must have taken on everyone.
And Lincoln's response. He says with a twinkle in his eye, "If that's the case, then I must be the most experienced man here."
Oh, wow. That's classic Lincoln. Finding a way to make light of a difficult situation, but also subtly acknowledging the shared burden everyone was carrying.
It's a moment of levity, a way of connecting with the soldiers on a human level, even in the midst of immense hardship.
So it's not just about making people laugh. It's about fostering a sense of camaraderie, of resilience.
There's this fascinating anecdote where he compares dealing with opponents to a cat dealing with a rat.
Okay, that's an image I wasn't expecting. Tell me more about this cat and rat analogy.
Lincoln tells this story about how if a rat runs past you, you don't chase after it. You let the cat take care of it, even if it means a bit of a mess in the process.
It's funny, but there's also a deeper message there, isn't there? It suggests a certain strategic patience, a willingness to let things play out.
Yes, it speaks to his ability to detach from the immediate fray to see the bigger picture. And perhaps it also suggests a certain acceptance of the messy realities of politics and life in general.
It's fascinating how these seemingly simple stories reveal so much about his approach to leadership. And speaking of leadership, this brings us to the broader question of Lincoln's enduring legacy. Why even today does he remain such a revered figure in American history?
It's a question historians and scholars continue to grapple with, but I think it's safe to say that Lincoln's humor is part of what makes him so relatable even all these years later. It humanizes him, reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable challenges, he never lost his wit or his ability to connect with people on a fundamental level.
That human touch is something that comes through in all these stories. It makes him seem less like a figure on a pedestal and more like someone we could actually have a conversation with.
And that sense of connection, I believe, is a crucial part of why Lincoln's legacy continues to resonate so strongly with people today. He embodies this ideal of leadership that's both strong and empathetic, decisive.
And his humor seems to be the thread that weaves all those qualities together. It's not just a separate aspect of his personality, it's integral to who he was as a leader and as a human being.
Many of his stories and quips offer insights that are just as relevant now as they were back then.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I'm curious to hear what you think are some of the most enduring lessons we can learn from Lincoln's approach to humor, and how can we apply those lessons in our own lives, especially in today's world?
It's fascinating how Lincoln's humor still feels relevant today. It's like his stories and quips have this timeless quality that speaks to something deeper about human nature.
What are some of those enduring lessons you mentioned? What can we learn from Lincoln's approach to humor and apply to our own lives?
One of the most powerful lessons, I think, is the importance of perspective. Lincoln had this uncanny ability to find humor even in the darkest of times. And it wasn't about denying the gravity of the situation. It was about finding moments of levity amidst the darkness.
As like he understood that even in the midst of a war, in the midst of immense suffering, there was still room for laughter, for a bit of lightness.
It's about recognizing that humor can be a source of strength, a way to cope with difficult emotions and maintain a more balanced perspective. It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there's still beauty and joy to be found in the world.
It's almost like humor was a survival mechanism for him, a way to keep going when everything felt so heavy.
That's a great way to put it, and it's a lesson that's just as relevant today. We all face challenges in our lives, and sometimes it feels like the weight of the world is on our shoulders. Cultivating a sense of humor, finding ways to laugh even when things are tough, they can make all the difference.
And it's not just about dealing with personal struggles. Lincoln also used humor to connect with people, even his opponents.
Absolutely. That's another key takeaway. He understood that humor can be a bridge builder. It can help us find common ground, see the humanity in others, even when we disagree with them.
That feels particularly relevant in today's world, where everything feels so polarized. It's easy to get caught up in our own echo chambers and forget that there are real people with diverse perspectives on the other side of the screen.
I agree. Lincoln's example reminds us that humor can be a powerful tool for fostering empathy and understanding. It can help us break down barriers and engage in more constructive dialogue, even with people we might not agree with.
It's like he's saying, hey, we might have different views, but we can still share a laugh. We can still connect on a human level.
And in a world that often feels increasingly divided, that's a message we need now more than ever.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Lincoln's humor, I think the takeaway for me is that it wasn't just about telling funny stories. It was about using humor as a tool for connection, for resilience, and for navigating the complexities of life with a bit more grace and ease.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Lincoln's legacy reminds us that laughter is a gift. It's a source of joy, connection, and resilience that can help us through even the darkest of times.
To all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration of Lincoln's humor and discovered some insights that you can carry with you. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep laughing.